Excellent. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you again, and thank you for inviting me back for part two of a talk. Which I'm not sure that happens very often. People don't tend to do sort of their talks in parts, but if you were lucky enough to, or unlucky enough maybe to have seen my first part and the previous Android Worldwide, you would have seen that we went over the top 5 issues in the OWASP top 10 mobile issues. And this is part two, where we'll go through numbers 5 to 10. Or rather 6 to 10 even. So let me jump straight into it. Hopefully you can see my slides. I can't see you anymore, so if there are any problems, please shout. Yeah, like I said, my name's Ed. I actually have got a new name since the last talk. I got married. But a little bit more about me. As the introduction said, I'm a senior Android dev at ASOS. I'm a dad to a Pomeranian dog who is asleep in the background, so I'm hoping he will stay asleep the whole time. I'm a security enthusiast, which means that I'm not a security expert by any means, but I do take an interest in it. So please bear that in mind when asking me any kind of security questions. Again, I'm not an expert, and if you do kind of have any high-level questions, you should definitely seek expert advice. You probably know me from my socials on Twitter or my website, spaghetti.dev. All of my kind of resources that I use in this talk are available on my website, but please do follow me for more, if not only just for the dog pictures. We'll go over quickly my talk agenda of what we'd like to cover. As I said, this is going to be an introduction to more of the OWASP top 10, specifically numbers 6 to 10. We're going to address the most common mistakes that we make in our app. We'll have QA at the end. And also for me, I'll have bedtime because it's a little bit late in the UK and I will definitely be tired after doing my talk. So there is, unfortunately, with all of my security talks, there is a kind of mandatory legal warning, in case anybody does anything kind of silly on the back of what I teach you. Anything you learn here should be used only for educational purposes. Please do not do anything on apps that you are not authorized to use, and consider seeking your company's security advice from somebody that knows a lot more than me. And finally, this talk is not associated with my employer or the OWASP Foundation, so please do bear that in mind. So with all of the kind of bump out the way, we'll dive straight in. Let's have a quick reintroduction to what OWASP is, just in case you didn't meet part one. Who or what is OWASP? Well, OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. It's a non-profit foundation that was created in 2001 that provides free security resources for developers worldwide. They also maintain multiple lists of security threats to application security, and we will be looking at the mobile one, of course. So as we've already kind of established, this is part two of the kind of two-part series. The first part is on YouTube, on Android Worldwide's YouTube. The URL is there. It's also available on my website, and I think Shalom's also put it in the chat as well. And I'm sure it may be if you're watching on YouTube, it may also be available on there as well. So we covered kind of the 5 top mobile threats here, as you can see on screen. But we're actually more interested in the next 5, which are on screen now. So we have insecure authorization, client code quality, code tampering, reverse engineering, and extraneous functionality. The first one, let's dive straight in, is going to be insecure authorization. Now, we'll follow the same format as my first part. I'll try and summarize in a couple of words what this means. And in summary for insecure authorization, it's your permissions. So when we talk about authorization, it's quite easy to confuse that kind of term with authentication. So straight off the bat, you should realize that authorization is not the same as authentication. Authentication is proving your identity, whilst authorization is performing an action with permission. So let's take a really simple example of logging into Twitter. You'd authenticate via your email and password, or maybe some sort of social login. And authorization would permit you to view your DMs and not mine, for example. You can't view anybody else's. So that would be the difference between authorization and authentication. So with that in mind, I'd like to also introduce a case study of where this can go wrong. And we're going to introduce an app called Smart Sheriff, which some of you may have heard of and some of you may not have. And this is basically South Korea's answer to how insecure can we make an app. So Smart Sheriff was a 2015 government-mandated mobile monitoring app in South Korea. South Korea has a law where children's devices must be monitored, which you can read into whether that's a good idea or not. But by law, this particular app had to be installed on anyone under the age of 19's phone. And it gave parents the ability to monitor web searches and kind of device usage and basically snoop on their child, which is pretty terrifying when you think about it. There is an amazing talk that you should definitely watch after this. After all the other talks at Android Worldwide, of course, called Smart Sheriff, Dumb Idea. And it is an excellent overview of kind of all the mistakes that this app made, one of which we'll look at right now. So the app had an API to retrieve lost passwords for a child's account that could be called by any user. So what you could do is essentially enumerate through mobile phone numbers, and it would return the app's password or the mobile number of that child's parent. It was trivial to traverse these numbers, as these numbers were known. And there's a pen test link for this at my on my website. And this was an example of when the authorization was too broad, and it allowed anybody to query for their lost password for any given account. You should obviously never be able to do that. And in this case, it could have been quite serious. Children could have been at risk. So let's talk about how we might avoid this. And when we are using any authorized APIs, the first thing we want to do is make sure that we use the minimum required permission for a call. We don't want to be making calls that don't require particular permissions, because that could be insecure and could be used by an attacker to kind of make more changes than are necessary. Most importantly, you should be verifying any user roles on the server side and avoiding any kind of role or permission information that comes from the device itself. So what I mean by that is say I've got an API call that can only be made by a particular group of people, and the app is the source of truth for that. What that means is that this could be spoofed, and attackers could potentially retrieve information that they're not welcome or should not receive. And that's why we would want to verify any user roles server side. That was kind of a lightning overview of the first one. I know we have a whole bunch of ones to kind of cover. So the next one is on client code quality. And I think this one's fairly self-explanatory. It's your code, right? The threat here is kind of difficult to define, but you can summarize it quite well as just poorly written code. Now, poorly written code is, well, depending on who you ask, is a number of things, but we can kind of say it's more about not following the coding best practices. It could also be a way of misusing a programming language. So some programming languages have inherent flaws within them. I've kind of highlighted a few here. JavaScript, for example, has the ability of having sort of cross-site scripting attacks. SQL, obviously, if you're using any kind of SQL variant, can succumb to SQL injection. And other languages that certainly use pointers, etc., C++, for example, could have buffer overflows, which could expose data, etc. I think it's again, quite a loose term for how we would define code quality, but it's very, very easy to avoid. The first thing you can do to avoid having poor client code quality that could lead to security issues is have a really solid code review process. I know we've had some talks today about code reviews, and that's definitely you should definitely take some advice there. But having a really solid code review process where multiple developers are looking at your code and analyzing it is the very first step you can take to make sure that you have more secure code going forwards. Obviously, on top of that, you may want to use static analysis tools such as SonarCloud or Sneak. And these are there's plenty of these on the market. highlighted two here that do slightly different things. I know Sneak is definitely more security focused, where Sonar Cloud, I think, has a more broader surface area and can do multiple other sort of static analysis as well. And what static analysis tools do is essentially do what it says on the tin. It analyzes your code it up against normally a database of issues or a rule set that will allow these tools to flag any issues that you may introduce into your app when you're writing your code. I would highly recommend using these tools. Many of them have free tiers for open source projects. So if you are an open source contributor, certainly consider integrating these into your CI pipeline. It's very, very straightforward to do, and I would, definitely recommend it. Another thing you can do is know the flaws and dangers with using a particular language. Highlighted a couple there. Obviously, if you're using a database or SQL, you want to make sure that you're using it in a way where it's protected against SQL injection. And certainly in the Android realm, you've got Room and you've got SQLite, and there are ways of calling those and making sure that you are passing in parameters or user-generated input into queries in a secure way that you should definitely consider using. And the last point I wanted to highlight was consider using strict mode to catch errors early. It's amazing actually how many people don't know about strict mode. Strict mode is a feature that's offered by the Android API that allows certain parameters to, or certain situations to cause the app to crash or cause the app to log specific errors. And these are, normally to do with leaks or using things in an insecure way. So let's kind of cover that now. It's like I say, a tool within the framework to detect code violations at runtime. It does things such as it would catch things such as performing I/O operations on the main thread, leaks. The example I give here is not closing a closable. And it's kind of split in two ways, where it's kind of split into thread and virtual machine violations. So let's have a quick look at kind of how we might use this to kind of highlight any potential errors or any potential security issues. Again, like I say, it kind of allows for different penalties. One of the penalties would be to write to logcat. So if anything is violating the policy that you've set, it would log to the logs. And as you can see in the kind of black box there, that is exactly what's happened. And it can also show what I call an annoying dialog, which is the dialog you also see on screen. So you would know when you're using the app if you violated the policy. You can also flash the device's screen. I had no idea you could do that, but apparently that one of the penalties is to flash the device screen. And finally, you can crash the app outright. So if you wanted to test the app and be really extreme, you may wish to crash the app on certain situations. And using strict mode is really, really straightforward. There's a strict mode builder. So again, there's kind of two examples here of when you might want to use strict mode. One is to detect kind of I/O on the main thread, which isn't necessarily a security concern, but just something you might want to do. And the other one is detecting leaks and non-HTTPS traffic, which is much more probably aligned to what I'm talking about now in security, and certainly something you should consider certainly when testing. I would never recommend you put this in a production app. You really probably don't want to be crashing the app if any of these are kind of violated whilst the users are using it. But certainly during testing, I'm sure you will be thankful for your QAs catching this as early as possible. So let's quickly go over some best practices with using strict mode for this. The first one is to add it within your application class before your super on create call. Like I say, using it with debug builds only. You don't want to be doing this on your production version of the app, and only using really penalty death for most serious cases. The case I would highlight here would be the penalty death on ClearText network, to make sure that you aren't calling any HTTP calls which should be HTTPS. And always read the docs, because yeah, I wasn't aware that half of these existed. I knew about strict mode. I've been using it for a while, but I wasn't aware of half of this. So please do read the documentation for more on that. Let's move on. Let's move on to number 8. We're going through these at a real pace, which is great. So code tampering, which again is your code. But what is code tampering? Hopefully it's fairly obvious. It's the unwanted modification of your app's code. So that can mean the modification of your app's resources, the unintended use of your app through jailbreaking or rooting your device. And this is a really common problem, actually. Code tampering, I think, if you work in a specific part of our industry, you've probably seen it quite a lot, and that tends to be in really popular apps such as freemium games. Freemium games have a real problem with this, where people will decompile your application, they will go through the code, they will recompile it to give themselves benefits of the game. It might be unlocking the premium version of the game. It might be giving themselves, 1,000 lives or whatever, depending on the game. And it's a real problem. So my first tip is to probably never download any APKs from websites that you haven't fully trusted, because yeah, they could be definitely have been tampered with. And the other kind of side of this is not only just to give people kind of free stuff in games, it is also used by bad people to to modify APKs with spyware and loads of other nasty bits and bobs that you definitely don't want. Cool. So how do we do it? Again, this next section is probably going to be teaching you stuff that you could use maliciously if you wanted to, but you definitely shouldn't. So again, please heed my legal warning at the start of this talk. The most common way of kind of decompiling an application is to use a tool that's called APK tool. This has been around for quite a long time, and what it does is it decompiles your app into sort of its resources and also Smalley files. Smalley files are converted DEX bytecode. It's kind of it sits as a sort of in level of language. It kind of sits above bytecode, but it's not quite Java. It's you can use it to modify the code, and it's quite easy to do. To generate, at least, is easy to do. You can use APK tool just with the D flag to decompile a particular APK. And what I wanted to do now is kind of show you an example of Smalley. I didn't want to show you an example that you could modify maliciously or anything like that. So the example I'm going to show is a really simple function that I think I pulled out of one of my sample apps. It's a really simple function. It's probably not production level code, but what it does, as you can see on screen, is that it takes an input as a number, and all it does is print out an asterisk that number of times and sets that as the text for a text view. Not very exciting, but it does generate an awful lot of Smalley code. Let's go through kind of what this does so we can understand. The first thing it does is that it defines that we are in a method and creates a local pin count parameter. The next thing it does, I guess I kind of skipped a little bit there, but the next thing it does is kind of some code around the binding and making sure that we have the binding view and it's converted to a text view. The bit that's highlighted on screen here defines a constant string that we will use. It converts it to a char sequence, and we invoke a static method on strings KT, and strings KT is the JVM name for the strings, for the Kotlin strings. What's the word I'm looking for? It's just a Kotlin strings file that contains all of the methods that you can apply to a string. And in this case, it calls repeat. And moves that to a particular register. Next, what it does is it casts that register to a particular type, in this case, char sequence, and it invokes a static method again on text view to set that text with the value of v1 and returns from the method. So as you can see, it's pretty much in Smalley is a very equivalent version of what we've just seen here. And this kind of Smalley language is all documented on the Android on the Android documentation website, and you should definitely take a look into it if you've never seen it before. Interesting. I'm not really sure what the animations have done here, but never mind. So like I say, you can modify the Smalley files to do whatever. There are samples on how to use this maliciously at this link. Again, please do not do this on any apps that you don't have permission for, but it can give you an idea of how to kind of to look at Smalley files and make modifications to do different functionality. And then finally, what you want to do is you want to recompile your app using APK tool and then re-sign using the jar signer tool. The example of this is, so you would make a modification to Smalley, and then at the bottom here, we kind of have 3 commands that you would need to run. You would need to use APK tool to build the particular folder with your modified code in. You would need to use key tool to generate the new key to sign the build, because when you use APK tool, your app is no longer signed. And finally, you would need to sign a new app APK using jar signer to make sure that it's using the new key that you've just generated. So this all sounds a little bit scary. I'm hoping some of you are probably thinking, oh, wait, hang on, my apps can be decompiled in this way. What can I do, and how can I possibly detect this? Well, the first thing to do is to detect whether your app has, you can use, to detect whether your app has been accessed by a device that's got root. And there's a really good website for that. You can use Rootbeer. It's an open source project. It's being added to all the time, and it 9 times out of 10 seems to work quite nicely. There are professional solutions to this, and certainly if you are in a large company, you should definitely look into whether a professional solution to this is the answer you need. We also have the Jetpack Security App Authenticator SDK, and what that Jetpack Security library does is it verifies the SHA of your signing certificate. And why that's important is you can tell if your SHA of your signing certificate has been modified. For example, if we've generated a new certificate when recompiling your app, this library would highlight that and allow you to, I don't know, stop whatever functionality you wish, display a message to the user, crash the app, do whatever you want, and it would avoid, you'd be able to kind of avoid any kind of nasty situation potentially with through the use of this library. Which kind of leads me onto a bit of a shameless plug. I do already have kind of 2 articles talking about this in more detail. I've only given you a really lightning overview here of a subject that I know people find quite interesting. So I'd certainly consider reading Learning to Hack Android with PicoCTF and Hands-On with Jetpack Security App Authenticator. I can't say that all in one word. Jetpack's Security App Authenticator Library, which are both available on my website. So please do check those out after, and hopefully you might learn something. I'm sorry that had to be quite a lightning introduction to code tampering and kind of how we do it. Let's move on. I've only got 2 left. Let's move on to reverse engineering, which for the 3rd time is your code again. And what is reverse engineering? Well, hopefully some of you know what reverse engineering is. It's decompiling your app and understanding how it works to find vulnerabilities and potentially other goodies. It's quite similar in approach to code tampering, but we're not modifying any code here. We're just trying to understand how it works. It uses a similar set of tools that we've just used. So in theory, you could use APK tool to decompile an app and go through the Smalley, but there are also better tools to do it. And the reason this kind of works is because at the end of the day, your APK is just a zip file with extra spice. That's a great quote. I think I want to say I came up with that, but I don't know if I did. But it is just a zip file with extra spice. You can simply rename an APK to a .zip, unzip, profit, and you get a wild folder with lots of files, looking sort of like this. So here we have a whole list of DEX files. The DEX files, like I said before, are Dalvik executable files. They're similar to Java class files, but run on the JVM, or Android's JVM. It contains Dalvik bytecode, and it is possible to convert to its original source code, although this is a bit of a lossy process. It doesn't always work, and you may lose some data. How do we do that? Well, converting dex to jar is quite easy. We can use a program called dex to jar. When we run dex to jar, what that does is it converts the dex files into jar files, which are kind of Java executable files. But these Java executable files can be read by software such as JDX, Luten, and JD GUI. And that allows us to explore the code. So once we have used dex to jar, we may get something such as this. And this is my example project from the previous talk that I have taken into JDX, and going through the GUI here, you can see that I am looking at my login activity, and it presents code that might look a little bit confusing. There, it doesn't look exactly like the code I entered because, first of all, it's in Java, and this project was written in Kotlin. And second of all, it's doing some kind of funky stuff to do with bindings and checking intrinsics. But what this allows me to do is to kind of get an overview of how this works. And if I was to dive deeper into this particular project, I might be able to gain I might be able to access information or understand how an app works and exploit that. Interestingly enough, I haven't got slides on how to stop doing that, but essentially what you want to do here is obfuscation. I'm not sure where the slide for that has gone. That's slightly concerning, but yeah, essentially what you want to do here is make use of ProGuard to obfuscate your app. You want to be able to make it as difficult as possible. It's always going to be possible in one way or another to go through and kind of piece bits together. It's very difficult. Well, it's impossible to do it in a way where you can really strip everything out. So it's impossible to do. Just what you want to do is kind of security through obscurity, I think is the term. You want to make sure that you obscure as much as you can to make it as difficult and as painful as possible for somebody to reverse engineer your application, to make sure that they aren't adding, make sure they have a difficult kind of journey to find out what they want to find out. So you can do things such as ProGuard. I know that there's, again, paid tools that also kind of, will provide that functionality. And again, depending on your situation and your security concerns, you should consider doing that. But certainly using ProGuard is the number one sort of approach that anybody should take to kind of make this a lot harder. Which leads us on to actually the last one, which is extraneous functionality. Which again is your code. I think, in hindsight, maybe highlighting that it's your code every time isn't overly helpful, but it's true. This one again is your code, and I think hopefully by now everyone's getting the picture. Why has my screen frozen? Apologies, I'm not really sure what's going on. Are you still with me? Excellent. Sorry about that. I'm not really sure what's going on. There we go. Excellent. So extraneous functionality is essentially a fun treasure hunt for hackers. What we are looking for here is essentially backdoors in your app's code. So that's things such as hidden feature flags, hard-coded debug accounts, and any other goodies that you would kind of leave behind potentially in your app, which you may think are dormant or untouched, but to a hacker and somebody that could reverse engineer your app and potentially code tamper it is a treasure trove of goodies. So how might we protect against that? The first thing to do is, where possible, do not ship with anything included in your app that you would not wish to be enabled should you not want it to be. You really want to be shipping out as minimum code as possible that's lying dormant in your app. Having multiple kind of entry points to your app that could be lying dormant is pretty much guaranteed for disaster, unfortunately. But I know that there's many cases where it's not possible. You might have feature flags, you might have other kind of settings or other things that you need in the app that you want to be able to turn on or off at will. And that's completely understandable, but just bear in mind that if it's lying there, it could potentially be exposed. I think this goes without saying, but you'll be surprised how many people do this. Please ensure that you strip out any hard-coded credentials or anything you wish to use for QAing the app. There was an app recently, I won't name it here in case anybody's here, but there was an app recently that got exposed for having hard-coded credentials of a super user in, and I think it caused quite a stir amongst some people. And finally, obviously, is good code reviews. I think a lot of these problems can be fixed by good code reviews, and hopefully, this talk, will be very brief, hopefully gives you a good kind of entry point into different parts of security where you can look into and understand kind of how we might do app security going forwards. And part of that is obviously good code reviews. So please do take time to invest into security and learn as much as you can to help you do better, more secure apps, and also to make sure that your code reviews take these learnings and kind of apply them in practice. And with that, that's actually it. I feel like I've waffled on quite long, but also in very, quite fast. But again, please do find me on Twitter. My handle is Spaghetti Code. I'd like to thank Android Worldwide actually for rescheduling this talk. I was originally supposed to do it at the last one, and unfortunately had to cancel very, very late on. So I'd like to thank everybody in the Android Worldwide team for being so fantastic to allow me to do it again, and also making sure that everything went well. So thank you so much for that. Again, my resources and there's loads on my website for this. Please do take a look. I've uploaded the slides already. So if you are wishing to go through the slides at slightly more your pace, then please do. And of course, please do reach out to me at any time if you're interested in learning more or have knowledge to impart on me. Again, I'm not an expert, I'm an enthusiast. So please do, enlighten me and enlighten others. And I think that's it. Question and answers to follow. Thank you for having me.
Excellent, Ed. Thanks for sharing like final 5 security aspect one should consider. And I think I personally believe like there's a lack of content around security. So I think, both of your talk would be really good reference point for people, who wants to improve their app security. So really appreciate you taking time and sharing that with us. We have a few questions. If you would like me to read, I can do that.
No, I'll go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, either way. Happy either way.
Cool. So the first question is by Shalom. Is strict mode for finding leaks provided by Leak Canary?
Thanks for the question, Shalom. So in terms of strict mode can be used to find leaks. I think Leak Canary possibly uses some of the I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think it uses some of the same APIs that strict mode uses, or at least under the hood is doing very similar work to what strict mode does. You can run them independently, but it doesn't really make sense if you're using kind of strict mode to crash the app if you're also trying to use Leak Canary to capture leaks. So I don't think it's not necessarily for Leak Canary. It can be used again for leaks. It's kind of, like I said, split into kind of two distinct parts where it can find leaks, and it can also do a whole bunch of stuff. Actually, to be perfectly honest, check out the documentation because it is scary how much it can do. I really wasn't aware, so definitely check out the docs for that.
Cool, thanks. Okay, the next one is from James. He's asking, is there any fear with device fingerprint tampering with regards to any security? For example, like device fingerprint spoofing?
Hi, James. Yeah, thanks for your question. Is there any fear with device fingerprint tampering? Yeah, sure. I think that I'm quite fearful of that. I'm also quite fearful of this question because I don't think I've got a very good answer for it. I've not personally seen anything around device fingerprint spoofing. I'm sure that there's going to be a talk online somewhere about that. And I'm going to endeavor to try and get a better answer for that because I don't know off the top of my head. But certainly when it comes to authentication, you want to make sure that you can do whatever you can to kind of avoid these situations. And I'm sure we can all remember the issues that Apple faced around Face ID and some of the crazy situations that when that first came out, what people were doing. I know that people were wearing masks of other people and it was accepting them. And I think if you had, there were ways of tricking it. So when it comes to especially when it comes to hardware sort of authorization, you'd hope things like fingerprints are fairly difficult to spoof. Things like faces and other biometrics become, yes, maybe I don't know if they're better or worse. You'd think that they were better, but in the case of Face ID on Apple, that was proven possibly not to be true. But great question. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer, to be perfectly honest.
No worries. Thanks. Next one is from Chuba. Is any thoughts on effectiveness of code obfuscation in defending reverse engineering?
Hi, Chuba. Yeah, and thanks. And great question. So yeah, my thoughts on code obfuscation is that you should 100% be making use of it. I think regardless of whatever size company or whatever sort of personal project you work on, code obfuscation should be probably a standard practice in the Android community. It really does. I without telling you to. Well, what you should do, I think, was a really good exercise is to take an app that you have that you have kind of authorization to use, of course, or a sample app, any sample app, download it and follow the steps in my slides and see the difference that kind of adding some obfuscation rules in ProGuard actually make, and you'll see quite a big difference. Certainly, if you were to, and I don't recommend you do this, by the way, but if you were to certainly take a large app, a well-known app, and sort of decompile it and open it up in a jar viewer, you'd be really surprised at kind of the amount of things you can obfuscate. If you wanted to piece together the pieces to try and work out what was going on, you'd need an awfully big pot of coffee to do it. So that's probably the best advice I would have is to definitely follow obfuscation. There's loads of good best practices. There's loads of great talks on that. And yeah, you should definitely research that more for sure.
Cool, thanks. The last one is actually the second last one. The last one just now we got. Yeah, this is from Dino. Why extraneous functionality is known as treasure hunt for hackers?
I do know. That was my attempt at a joke. It's not actually known as that in the industry. What I meant by that, though, is that extraneous functionality is the kind of hidden functionality in your app that you might not want exposed. So for hackers, it is essentially a treasure hunt. When you go into an app, they might be looking for something that they can exploit. So they're looking throughout your app to try and find maybe that one class or that one method that they can exploit that could, maybe grant them a privilege or maybe unlock a feature or maybe, do whatever. So it's probably not known by industry professionals as a treasure hunt, but that is a way you can kind of think about it. So that's kind of an analogy I'd use there.
Cool. Okay, the last one is from Felipe. Any recommendation of tools library to encrypt data that really need to be stored in the device? And I took a look in Google Ping. Did you have any opinion on that?
Excellent. Hi, Felipe. What you want is part one of my talk, which is available on YouTube. We do talk about this. We did go about it quite in depth. But in answer to your question now, to save you kind of watching an entire video, there are tools I would recommend. We have the Jetpack Security Library, which I briefly referenced in this talk, and that provides actually a way of encrypting your shared preferences. So if you have any kind of things that you want to save securely, it can use that actually uses Google's Tink library under the hood to secure your shared preferences. Again, shared preferences, are something you should only really store quite small bits of data in. It's certainly not a solution for a large amount of data. But if you are looking to secure a large amount of data, there are alternative solutions, one of them being SQL Cipher. SQL Cipher is a wrapper around SQLite that kind of provides the ability to encrypt and decrypt data. And there is, by the SQLite developers, there is a, what's it called? I think there is a wrapper around Room, or a helper that actually is an open SQLite helper that you can use within Room to secure your data in using a Room database. And that actually would also apply to SQLite, because I think they inherit a open SQLite helper, which is used by both of those libraries. So if you're using a common SQL-based database library in Android, chances are that SQL Cipher can probably cater what you need. So that would be my recommendation there. I haven't looked at Tink in detail, but again, the majority of these will use sort of that similar library under the hood. So yeah, I think that's it.